Hi again, and welcome to another episode of the CEO's Address. So today I'm joined with Mirko Ivanda. He is our co-head of power and gas in our new operation in Zug. Mirko has a lot of experience going back, way back into 2005 in these markets, and it's a new space for us in the past year. We've been learning lots. Of course, at Onyx, we are oil specialists and oil swap specialists, but financialization in commodities doesn't just stop there. There's a lot being built out in power, many contracts to go. It's on a similar trajectory. So there's a lot going on in the power markets right now, gas markets right now, but there's also a lot to talk about the general market boom, where things are going and where things are going in the world. It's obviously such an important time. So I wanted to get Mirko here to discuss everything around that. So thanks for coming.
Nice
coming
to be
from
here.
Zug, right? Flying right in.
Yeah, from Switzerland.
Yeah,
Indeed.
not too bad going this way, but the other way, Zug Airport is a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, well, apparently Brexit didn't only have good things about it. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but it's okay.
So you joined us a year ago, and the mandate was, at the end of the day, it's a new market for us. I think we much preferred looking at it like, let's get some specialists in and build around, maybe bringing in some of our expertise at a later date, right? At the end of the day, because it's such a new market for us, we can't expect oil swaps and oil markets to trade anything like these markets. So it's a bit of a learning job for us as well, getting to know each other, but also getting to know the market. So I guess, first off, how have you found it? How's the difference been from where you've been? Or maybe you could talk a bit about your career before and leading up to Onyx.
Yeah, sure. So, it's been a while now, almost 20 years. So started in 2005 at Vattenfall. Big Swedish utility in Hamburg in Germany was the base. And I was very lucky. I had some great teachers, saw a great way of being a very, very fundamental approach to risk taking and to expressing your views. Having said that, the financial markets really started taking over, right? And that's in essence what happens when a market grows. Mm-hmm. And the liberalization of the European power markets was a big step, I would say, towards efficient price finding. Mm-hmm. But Europe being sometimes the bureaucratic monster that it is, it created also a lot of how should I say, discrepancies. Mm-hmm. In some markets found the prices very early, others didn't, because you have, in Europe you have so many different countries and power grids which have been merged together. Yeah. But then you still have in some countries, now without going into specific countries, different ownership profiles of the assets and willingness to take risk. Actually having the understanding that just having an asset is a massive risk.
We obviously all these kinds of there's so much to these markets. I think that's the best place to start for me, because oil market is in a way, whether or not it's to do with this development, like path and development or not, because of the cargo traffic being the number one way oil moves around the world, it's trackable, it's kind of slow, the way the physical moves. And there's been a lot of work on standardization. Once it's out, in the open, it's a centralized market, globalized market, whereas power and gas is much more intertwined into governments and countries, and, pipeline networks, you get no visibility on, right? They're closed off, and you unless you read what's being reported, there's no way for you to know what's going on. You can't go physically watch a pipeline like you can a ship. So there's so many structural differences immediately from oil and power and gas. And it leads quite nicely into how you would analyze it, because me particular, but in general, we're big proponents of embracing the financialization of oil and what it means and how to analyze it. And of course, a big part of it, positioning and all that. But it's also trying to understand precisely where physical gets involved in the pricing. But with power and gas, you actually can't ignore at all the physical link, because it's so immediate. I mean, you have by hour contract or 15-minute contracts. Yes. At the very front, and it's so related to the end user. And it's really immediately going to the end user, the consumption. Everyone watches the World Cup one night, power usage immediately goes up. There's no equivalent in oil, because you can't just consume all at once. Yeah. Like that. So we have to accept there's a huge fundamental aspect to it from the off, which again, going back to why we were keen to get you and Ante involved, because we knew we needed that expertise. But just going back to that then, so at Vattenfall, That was more the utility kind of physical operation which you got you first.
Very much so, but there were also ones who really embraced the free market and its opportunities. And to come back to what you were saying, we have tons and tons of data and real-time data where you see actually the supply, the demand, and so you're able to form much better fundamental views of how the market could potentially be in the future, right? Because with us, we have that spot price. Once it delivers, goes into intraday, and because of the massive volatility due to renewables, and unfortunately in Europe, some missing baseload power, a lot due to the fact that Germany turned off the nukes. One would argue way too early, but that's maybe for another time. But yeah, for sure. So being able to have a proper stack model, which allows you to have this kind of visibility of what is happening in the power and gas markets, is very important. And
but
that's
it's also again, going back to that structural difference. There's a lot of truth in power and gas markets. You know right now what the actual consumption is.
Yes.
And with oil, it's so finger in the air. Even to know day one, even to know last week's actual physical consumption is impossible around the world. Whereas power and gas, it's not.
No, it's not. It's very visible.
Yeah.
And it's just about, I mean, Europe showed this. If you want to be transparent about it, you really can be, right? Because the electrons, they move so fast, but the end consumer, it's visible. And so, yeah, I mean, for instance, the massive fall in German industrial activity is very visible. It's not just visible on the gas side, but it's also visible on the power side.
I loved working with you guys this year as I got to know you. Like, given all this, what we're talking about, you don't have a choice. You have to really, really understand governments and politics and policies to the minutiae, because every announcement, a seemingly innocuous announcement to the everyday person can have this like fundamental difference. And there's so many things we could talk about, but I guess to make it interesting for the viewer, I guess right now, loads of interesting things going on. So I guess we could talk about, on the one hand, the Iranian situation, but actually that's a bit more of an oil focused thing finally this time. But actually the Russia-Ukraine was very much about structural changes to pipeline economics, pipeline flows. And also let's not obviously ignore the LNG flows and how that's rejigged everything. But one thing that's going on right now is Russian gas coming through Ukraine, right? So you've got Nord Stream 2 that was blown up.
Yes.
One that's still going.
Yes.
And
well, it's open, but it's not flowing.
Sorry, not flowing.
Yep.
And so right now we're getting the gas, or Europe's getting the gas via Ukraine.
There's about today 42 MCM still coming through those Ukrainian pipelines. And I mean, right, the historics would be, just to give some context, Europe back in the 60s, 70s, mainly Germany, spent a lot of money investing in Russian natural, or that time Soviet Union gas assets, to bring them over to Europe. Lots of pipelines were constructed. The main ones go through Ukraine. And now we are at the point, obviously, with the war and the conflict, that this is probably coming to an end.
Yeah.
Right? Without going much.
But I guess interestingly though, is in like straight away you would think as a general observer, how is any of it going through, and how is it so well protected? How's it not been bombed? How's there not conflict? But obviously people are incentivized to keep the flow going.
Yes.
Europe need the gas.
Yes.
Russia need the money. There's no way around it. They weren't going to sanction gas the same way they sanctioned oil because of the immediate need and how screwed basically, especially Eastern Europe, would be without it, right?
Yes. Some painful decisions were taken, which now, economics aside, obviously because it's politics, it's geopolitics in this term, because it is a massive conflict on our east. But interests prevailed to kind of keep flows at least to a kind of bare minimum to arrive at Baumgarten in Austria, and then for it to be distributed because look, one thing to keep in mind, rich countries can afford high prices and even exorbitant prices for a time. But even a giant like Germany, industrial giant, maybe former industrial giant, could afford this huge spike that came out, because it was basically the German government saying, okay, we're going to fill up our storages come what may. Other countries are obviously not in such a financial position to do that, and especially in the former Soviet space of Europe, we have a lot of just interlinkage that it's really difficult to get rid of immediately. And we've been blessed that we haven't had harsh winters in the past two, and let's see what this winter will bring. But this replacement of those molecules of that gas, will have for Europe to come through LNG.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
So I guess this is where I get to, like, it's a good overview, because then it's like, but then you're a trader, you don't have the luxury of saying, reading what newspaper you want to read to get a general opinion or who writes what. You need to know the absolute truth.
Yes.
So which is why I think you guys were very quick onto the decline of German industrial, demand and production, right? At the end of the day, like you've been saying that for 6 months, but it's only just coming out in the news, the job losses, things like that. You didn't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, who knows who what to believe. You have to look rawly at the numbers, and you came to a really clear conclusion. You're not being political. And on the flip side, you've got the supply side, which is saying the market right now is very focused on a Cesare swap deal, right? Could you explain a bit more about that?
Yes. So basically what they're trying to achieve is to replace molecules from one side of the globe to another, right? To allow basically virtually gas from the Caspian Sea, from Azerbaijan, and I say Caspian Sea on purpose because it will eventually connect to Turkmenistan and other Central Asian places which have a huge potential for delivering and bringing gas to us, right? So what they're trying to achieve is basically saying, okay, Russia will be sending their gas to Azerbaijan so that Azerbaijan can consume it there. And Azerbaijan, what they will be doing is they will be selling this gas into the European markets.
So taking their existing term contracts that they source from elsewhere, they will then, as opposed to consuming that, will send that to Europe, and they will then instead consume the Russian gas. And that's how we'll get around.
I mean, this is kind of the point of the swap, is to create also some acceptable visuals, I would say, for the gas that needs to be consumed here. I mean, because it is, again, especially in Central Europe and Southeastern Europe, we just simply need this, right? There's no two ways about it. And what many people in the market are still not believing is that the warring parties, and there you come actually to the importance of these pipelines. It's exactly what you said, how come they didn't get blown up? How come this and that? Well, because there's always a tomorrow, right? God willing, a peace deal will be achieved at some point. Nobody will be happy with it, but at least people would stop perishing. But what this will do is actually bridge that gap for all parties involved until a complete peace is found. And that shows the importance of these assets also in keeping from complete and utter escalation, which obviously, having seen some of the images, it's hard to fathom, but it is a little bit of a fail-safe. And it has worked to the extent that obviously it worked throughout the whole Cold War, and whether or not we're now in Cold War 2.0, very likely, but historians will judge that. But this swap deal and even that the Ukrainians, they understand the importance of the assets they have, and they would want those assets to continue. Ukraine has massive potential when it comes to gas storages, when it comes to these flows. Its industrial base, hopefully once rebuilt, is something something of consequence, I would say.
I think this is what it might be frustrating for the average viewer to hear traders talk sometimes, because again, we're just looking at the truth, looking at the way things are flowing, and looking at economics and what's incentivized and what's not incentivized. But very quickly, sometimes you feel like you're treading on eggshells, because you're saying Russian gas is going to find its way to Europe anyway. And well, you can't say that. We've got sanctions and well, look, it's just the truth. We don't have a choice. We're not going to trade off a political view. We have to trade off what's really happening. And so I think every politician or anyone interested in politics should really study trading, because the flow of money, again, taking like our economy down to its like root things, it's energy consumption at the end of the day is like a huge component of our economy, right? So where are we getting that energy? You can't just say, well, let's stop using Russian. It's like what's been embedded and the complexities around assets from power, gas, oil. You can't just switch on and off whenever you want, because you're talking about the difference between running your economy or not. So you mentioned the point
Feeding
about,
your people or not.
well, this is it. And that's what the cost of living crisis brought closer to home for UK people in particular. It's very easy to be anti-Putin or anti, a particular event, of course, and people won't disagree on kind of the headline opinions. But when it comes to actually figuring out how to keep economies going and what the actual leverage is, considering debt, considering national security, considering all these things, it becomes a whole different game. And I would say my understanding of politics within energy is very rooted in oil. And I've very much enjoyed with you guys exploring the power and gas network and how, it's actually a lot more of a hidden world, I would say, because of this kind of pipeline networking, because of how flows can be moved around and policies and cross-border policies. And, suddenly we're talking about the French election and one party getting in or another. The difference between French power and Germany power, in an oil trade, you would say, if I've got one region to the next, and for us it would be Northwest Europe versus Mediterranean, if there's some kind of blowout, we know that will create arbitrage opportunities to send from the Med to France or send the Med to Northwest Europe. In power and gas, it's like there is no real arbitrage if the policies don't dictate it. If you've got a nationalist government that's saying we're only going to use, we don't care what the price is over there, you're selling everything domestically, you just get these huge blowouts and the spreads between the two. So there's nothing really, basically politics is such a big economic driver of the trading landscape. Whereas obviously you could say to some extent that's true in oil as well, but not to that extent. Like it would never blow out a spread unless it was a huge, huge shift in policy. Whereas a slight shift in policy on the power and gas side is astronomical difference. Like you mentioned nuclear power, right?
Yeah.
Shutting down nuclear power.
In Germany was...
Well, it just changes the way you can trade it now. Like, for example, right now, you were texting me last week, oh, we're wet and windy this week. I wouldn't care about that in oil, right? It'd just be like, it just doesn't, who cares? But you're like, no, it's a massive difference because you're talking about the base load of how we create energy. If there's no real renewable sources coming into the grid, then you're relying on gas or whatever. It's just immediately a difference.
To give that specific example of Germany and France, you have a lot of interconnectors. In Europe, we have this flow-based power grid system, which basically you can think about it as a swimming pool. And you want to keep the swimming pool level, right? And then if the swimming pool at some place goes down, power will flow to that area, and we should have efficient price finding, right? So. But then since there is national interests, right, and they continue to be, and they will continue to be, France basically said, listen, guys, you over there in Germany, you're building out all this, renewables, great, but there's no controllability. You have not achieved controllable baseload on a renewable basis.
But that's because it might be windy one day, you collect energy, but not the next day. And storage is not good enough yet. That's the general...
Absolutely, that's the gist of it, right? Yeah. And basically what France said is, look, guys, we cannot keep using our nuclear base load. And basically, if you're running these power plants in a way that they're not meant to be run, by moving them up and down, you cause damage. I mean, these are lots of moving parts, and basically what France said, look, we're gonna cut the border capacities to Germany. Obviously you find a technical reason why this needs to be, and it's probably a very valid reason, but it's also a political decision to say, guys, listen, it is what it is. We also need to protect our industry.
So what were France upset by?
Well, look, this is and without going into, as you say.
Well, be apolitical, but at the end of the day, like what objectively...
Well, basically they're saying is, look guys, we're not going to be your generator while you turn off your nuclear power plants, and thus raising prices for our customers, for our industry. There's only so long we're going to be able to do that.
Sorry, I don't quite understand. So Germany is sourcing its own power.
Well, Germany has its own power grid, its own base of power production, right? But since we're all connected, Germany has been drawing a lot of baseload power from France, right? And this power,
It's shocking their like natural supply and demand balance, right? Because they have accumulated a consistent base load coming from a number of different sources.
well, nuclear and hydro are the strongest in France,
Okay.
right? And this is what,
But they've managed to create a level of consistency.
Yes.
And by Germany now doing
by
less,
being so volatile.
by being so volatile, is screwing up France.
Yes, because in 1 second, Germany can have 70 gigs of renewables, and literally 30 minutes later, you can have only 30,000 megs of renewables power available, right? And this uncontrollability and this volatility.
Yeah. Well, let's also explain that, because again, it might be interesting people to know, don't like when that does happen, you get such a big spike of power available on the grid from renewables. There's so not enough storage to store it.
No.
The storage capabilities aren't technologically
Aren't
there
there
yet. You just literally can't deal with the power. Prices go
goes
deeply
even negative.
It goes
Yes,
deeply negative.
yes,
So we
yes.
went negative once in oil, and it caused absolute mayhem,
carnage.
right? Carnage. It happens all the time in power. But the frustrating thing about that, and I guess to play into your point about why France would be frustrated, is that if you can't capture the value of those negative prices, like you're literally getting paid to take the power,
It's pure punishment.
then it's just punishment.
Yes,
It's
yes.
just you don't get paid for the low prices.
Especially for the economy and for industrial users.
So
it
France
is
now have to
punishment.
sell their power at negative prices. People can't really use it. It goes to waste. And then when they do need the power, it's not there.
Well, it starts first in Germany. Just to be clear, the main damage is there, and then France can control it to an extent. It also depends on the profile of your power plant structure, right? So if you have a lot of hydro availability in terms of pump storages, those are big batteries that you can use. We have a lot of those in the Alpine region, so great. We have a lot of that in the Nordic regions, although most of it there is run of river. So you do have the ability to balance the grid by turning these off and on, right? And the same you do with gas. But we've come to a situation where it's simply too much. And you're experiencing these.
So France said, look, enough's enough. We're now just shutting this.
Well,
the connection.
we're cutting the connection to half, and then we'll see, right? And look,
A lot of traders had a Germany versus France position on.
yes.
And so what, they were short Germany, long France? Other way around?
Yes.
So which way? They were short Germany.
Well, I mean, obviously, nature of markets being you had some people there
Okay, fine,
and some
yeah,
people
yeah,
there.
yeah.
But yeah, the prices basically after this announcement came in, France really fell and Germany went apart.
Yeah.
I think on the Cal you went up to 15, 20 euros.
So we had quite a few hedge funds who are in this space who had reliable trades. And again, it's what makes power so dangerous.
Yes.
Is consistent trades that might work on oil over time. Power, they can just be disrupted in 1 second.
Yes.
So you're trying to rely on this spread working every year,
Yes.
and then suddenly it's completely blown out. So there's a lot of losers there, and hedge funds were very risk on this year, coming off the back of maybe having missed out in 2022, 2023, rushing in all this speculative money in the market. They bet on a trade like Germany, France, and get destroyed, right? So that's a bit of a tourist thing in a way, but at the same time, how you meant to, this is why you need to have such your eyes on policy the whole time. Just to stay on that, something that's come to my mind as well is people talk a lot about national security for energy from a perspective of securing the physical molecules, like you say, or electrons or whatever. That's fine, but that's not securing your price. So why are there not more government mandated hedging programs, for example? Because like we say, like if we were to say, like we're quite comfortable with the prices, we can sustain as a relatively rich country, a certain level of price. But what we can't handle is, some geopolitical tension kicking off. And because the whole world's connected, it's just going to blow up our prices. So we want protection against that whilst we secure more of the physical as well. Why are there not more hedging programs? Or are there any? If it's a good question, then it's something, we should be pushing forward, Governments should hedge on the buy side as well as producer countries on the sell side.
I mean, a saying comes to mind, victory has many parents, defeat is a lonely one. And so I think somebody needs to make those decisions, Somebody needs to stand behind those decisions.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to answer for those decisions. And being that it's, if we are being transparent, then the prices will be seen. And right, so this.
Yeah, you're right. People will look at it like you hedged the nation's energy usage ahead of time. We've locked in this price, but you will see actual realized losses going down to negative potentially. And someone will say, you cost the country 50 billion. In reality, they've offset that with cheaper electricity, but no one will ever look at it that way. That's probably a big reason as to why.
Yes, I mean, for sure. And look, I would say that, in times of duress and an emergency, and, one can make that argument that was the case during the, Russia-Ukraine conflict or war. And decisions need to be taken.
People were talking about, where we're going to get our oil and gas from. It's like, look, that wasn't that hard. Sourcing the molecules, it's out there. It's the price.
Yeah.
So the price is what created the cost of living crisis, not the supply. So people saying, we could have produced it ourselves and we could have been secure. It's like, well, if it's all part of a global network, just because you produce it in the UK doesn't mean the price of it won't go up with the rest of the global prices, and you'll still get screwed just because you have the supply.
Yes.
The price of it will still be astronomically high, and the money will flow to these private companies that sell it to you.
Yes. Somebody has to pay the bill.
Somebody
right?
has to pay the bill. So I guess if we extrapolate this to, geopolitical situations and how astute you have to be with it, but you also have to have this deep understanding. It's not enough for you to say, well, I know generally how economies work and I've got a macroeconomic view. How would you, if someone getting into this market or someone wanting to analyze this market, what is it from a geopolitical standpoint you need to really study or be aware of? Like one of the first things you said was that there was a book about the chessboard. Do you remember that? I've actually forgotten the name already now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Brzezinski.
Brzezinski,
the chessboard.
The chess was that was all about like having if you controlled basically the Middle East and Asia region, the middle of the world.
Middle of Eurasia.
Then you essentially had a good handle on everything, really.
Yes.
So, but there's some like very deep like historical policies that are going on and how things work that people just assume, this person's in power, Netanyahu, Israel, or whatever, the Iranian guy at the moment, and it's between them. It's like, no, these are deep embedded things that have been going on for many, 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 many years. And you can't just look at things in isolation right now. You've got to look at the past and how it's all built up and kind of how, especially how assets and, what was the big thing going on this week or last week? It wasn't that Iran and Israel were fighting for oil markets. It was because Israel were threatening to bomb oil facilities. So it's people, governments know, everyone knows like what the weak points are in countries is the energy. It always comes back to the energy. So you need to look at their historical policy around energy and how their conflicts involve energy. Like Daniel Yergin's a big like historical analyzer for oil. And he was actually talking recently about Hitler lost the war because of oil. And he had an argument for that and whatever. The point is he had a good thesis for it. And I just think, sorry, I rambled. My point was, how do you get that expert knowledge that you have to have on geopolitics to be able to trade power and gas?
I think curiosity and you really have to spend a lot of time reading now in the
reading the right things, because if I just went and read the Telegraph and read like, I don't know, random things like that, you have to...
Look, well, first you must be a student of history.
Yeah.
And the geopolitics part, one needs to also understand the geo, right? It's geography and how geography has affected human behavior. And
there's a good book, Prisoners of Geography. Have you seen that?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay, I'll check it out.
It's not like a huge, it's just like, as you say, like it's a really good way of starting at that premise, that book. It's like, let's just start with the geography.
Yes.
Like, countries are completely different policies and the way they do things, just based on their
somebody who's
mountains.
landlocked. A landlocked country is not going to behave in the same way that a country that has access to deep water ports for itself and security of that, right?
So you have to have a good understanding of that.
Yes, and I think you just start by. I mean, there's so many good books around, but as you said, Daniel Yergin, The Prize, and he has a new book out, The New Map, also very good and gives a great overview.
But is it fair also to say, like, again, so I get like a constant stream of consciousness from you about, you're analyzing markets. I love it, right? Like literally the sources you connect from, I can just tell there's a search for objectivity. It's X threads, whatever stuff you've been sent from Telegram, whatever, to big name, Financial Times, Bloomberg, and everything in between, because you have to just go and find out every single different point of view, every different kind of try and empathize with everyone, I guess, to really understand what the next moves are going to be. And you probably argue that traders who bring in their internal politics, bring in their bias about their, I think there's a bias we used to talk about, like a home bias. So you also think, well, in this country, this is the way we think of things, so I'm going to apply that to the rest of the world. Like trading, markets won't give a shit about your opinion on that. You have to go and look at everyone else's point of view.
And nobody's going to return the money you lost because you read it somewhere or some analyst said it somewhere, right? So for sure, look, you need to do your own research, and it's not easy for people to be objective because, look, we get bombarded by so many things, and I certainly don't achieve objectivity all the time. But I think if you strive for it, to try to understand, okay, somebody born, talking about the lottery of where you're born.
Yes.
If you're born in some, very bad place, and you're confronted by bad things, your thinking as you go through life will be dictated by that, right? If you grew up in a place that...
I'll give you a good example of that for trading. So one of the things that's driving your carbon view right now, bearish carbon, right? We can talk a bit more about that. But, loads of different complexities around why and what's going on, but at its root cause, it's a luxury product. Now that's going to be like contentious, right? What do you mean a luxury product? We're trying to save the world. It's like, yeah, we get it. But at the end of the day, when you're faced with the job of a tough life, just trying to survive, and there's wars going on, are you really going to pay a carbon tax on top of what you're consuming just to live? The answer is no, right? So it makes sense that carbon is inversely correlated to basically rising tensions in the Middle East or the idea of war. Because the more likely war is, the less people are going to want to or going to bother paying carbon tax, essentially, right?
Look, and just to give some context, right? I mean, Europe did actually a great thing with this carbon cap and trade system set up. And it was basically there to give a price signal to incentivize renewables, something that is, as clean as possible, right? And since it is a politically created market, it's had quite a volatile history, one would say. In the ETS1 phase, prices actually crashed because the caps were set not in a great way, and there was an oversupply and prices crashed, right? One can argue, and I was definitely a big proponent of that argument, is that actually carbon saved the power price in the past decade when it started to level at 5, going towards 10 and 15. And when I say saved, especially in Germany, is because of the cannibalization of renewables, right? When they're there, everybody has it, zero, even negative, right? But what does this do? It kills the hours of profitability for baseload generators. These are your nuclear plants, these are your coal plants, and obviously gas plants have become a baseload ingredient as well. So
explain that though. So you're saying the price when it's $5 or it's low, the power price is low?
No, so again, we've had situations where the German power price was negative for a long time. You had like the front cal trading down to 24, 25, 26 euros. Absurd. Like at this level, at this price signal, nobody's going to build power plants. And the ones that are there will have a very tough time even paying the basic bills.
Okay.
Right? So bad price signal, it cannot work. Europe did a great thing by committing itself to a cleaner future, but we also want to have a controllable and stable future, right? And so then thankfully the Europeans, and this was a time where you had to be reading the minutes from the environmental meetings in Brussels, just to get a sense of what people were thinking.
This is what I'm saying.
And this is like the boring stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what to do.
Well, you say it's boring, but you find a passion for it in
it's
trading.
repetition. It's repetition. Like it's looking for the signs that will either prove your thesis or show that you're wrong, right? And then, but just to come back to the carbon side, so did a great thing, and it was a sort of thing that Europe tried and is trying to set a global standard for this, to have proper price finding for carbon, although there's a lot of arguments to be made against that, but that's neither here nor there. Basically saying that, okay, we are going to price this, we're going to actually pay for it, it will be done. But then what happened was, obviously this works in good times, right? When there's lots of employment, everybody's doing well, and we're able to afford this. And then obviously the more hours you produce in a carbon-free way in Europe, you have 8,760 hours in the normal year. And basically the goal is to drive the dirty hours down, which is fair enough and great. But then you come to the cost part you mentioned. At what cost are you doing this, right? I mean, there's this old joke that goes, the farmer got his cow to give him milk, but he doesn't give her food. She did it once, then she died the next day.
Right.
Yeah. So what are we doing? What are we doing at the moment? Look, it is no surprise that carbon, it rocketed to 100 plus. But then once the war started and this relatively cheap gas that was flowing into Europe is gone. Some might argue it's gone for a very, very long time.
You're now having to pay higher prices for the dirty stuff, forced to, and you have to pay a carbon tax.
Well, look, the creators of the system, they don't like to call it a tax. In essence, it is, right? There was this kind of ongoing conversation. Should we do it in a free market way, sort of, right? Or should we just put a tax on it and let it be progressive and say, okay, until 2030 it will be 30 euros, until 2035 it will be 35, 40 euros. And look, to be fair to industry, some in industry had said, look, we like planability. Give us that.
That is the whole point of futures market derivatives. A lot of people say, like, why do we need financial markets? It is planability. Yes. I mean, the shale oil market was able to boom because of hedging forward, right? They were able to take that hedging or to the bank or secure that with the bank in order to give the bank certainty to lend the cash, and then the production goes. So we need exactly the same for power.
Exactly.
So I think hedging is something that needs to be a very normal thing for absolutely every company and even the end user. Like, hopefully one day we can bring to the end user a Revolut style lock in your energy bills. That needs to happen at some point, and the producers as well need to know that they've got security to produce things. But can we talk about, like, again, so why were you early to the kind of bearish, let's just say Europe view, I guess, which led to, how do we actually express that in power, gas, carbon? And you chose carbon. Like, why, or majority of it is carbon? Like, can we talk around?
Sure. I mean, look, it's a combination of carbon and power, because power is almost the ultimate derivative, right? Because you can produce it with coal, with gas, with water, and nuclear, and et cetera, et cetera. So why? Well, basically, when you're seeing company like BASF, huge chemical companies saying, look, guys, we understand, we have goodwill, but we have no more planability, and the prices are simply too high, right? And look, it is economics in the end of the day. You can only take so much pain because your company started in Germany 120 years ago and whatever. No. At some point, if you are honest...
I'll add another thing to that as well. I mean, everyone got very excited about the carbon price pre-war, pre-2022.
Absolutely.
And it coincided with a big societal push that the pressure on going renewables, just up oil here.
We could afford it.
No, but it was getting serious. I was saying to another podcast, we were having recruitment issues. Someone 2 months in was like, I just can't stand the pressure from my peer group that I'm in oil. Like, I just can't handle it.
Yeah.
And you fast forward a few years later, and we literally never get that going, because it was like a societal bubble that burst because reality hit because of the economics, essentially, right? I mean, but it's all in line. Carbon price then had to go down because the price was probably justified because the willingness from people to accept it who could afford it, like you say, but also companies were buying into they were kind of getting rewarded for a short time for being greenwashing, right? Yes. Because if you said, oh, we're compliant, what's it called again? ESG compliant, we're going to get more investment from the BlackRocks, from the investment communities that, have to have a checklist of, do you hit this ESG criteria and all that kind of stuff. CEOs like Bernard Looney and the Shell guy were bleating on about, we're going to convert ourselves to beyond petroleum, all that kind of stuff. and they were trying to get the influx of capital, the share price rising, and that was how they were going to benefit. As soon as they weren't getting that benefit, and as soon as then we had a war and there's all these kind of things, it was like, well, how can you justify this whole mantra of we're going to basically all pay extortionate prices to convert us to renewables, which will still take 10, 15 years. Oh, and in the meantime, all the companies are going to suffer. They're not going to stand for that. So that's why very quickly we had a realignment, and suddenly even Shell, even BP were like, get rid of the CEOs. Let's start again. Let's invest in all the fossil fuels, because there's only one way to do this whilst we can still maintain.
Look, if we are going to come to a place where our energy consumption is cleaner and cleaner, you need a carbon price, right? So that's absolutely clear in my view. But you can obviously make different arguments. But anyways, having said that, it really depends where you are on the scale of your development and if you can even afford it, right? So Europe, having the carbon price it has now, what was it, 62 at the moment, 61, whatever?
But it was like 100.
It used to be 100, it used to be 105, but let's not forget it used to be 5.
No, I know, but we're talking about the formation of the view and why you were quite...
Yeah. And it comes back to the fact that we could afford it in great times, right? And it was kind of this thing where we're going to price it now so that we don't have to deal with it later, right? Great. Having said that, Europe with the CBAM now, which is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, it wants to incentivize globally the creation of carbon markets, right, for countries. And what it basically says is that, okay, if you are coming and importing into Europe, because we want to protect our industry, what we expect from you is you will pay either a proportion of our carbon price, or you will prove that you have a well and stable functioning carbon market yourself, right? And obviously for places from Africa and Asia, except the really rich ones, they don't have that, right? So basically this will be quite a big burden, and it depends on how high this burden will be, right? And look, to be fair to politicians in Brussels, it's not easy, right? I mean, it's not easy to come up with these things and to expect not only your society, but others to adhere to this, right? And the problem with Europe is that the problem Europe faces now is we don't have enough clean and stable, controllable energy. So hopefully this nuclear renaissance that we are seeing is going to be serious, and it's going to be taken serious, especially in Berlin.
But rewinding, this view on Germany became essentially a bearish economic view because they weren't getting the cheap gas anymore.
Yes, basically.
They were actually losing, again, so this is now going away from power and gas, but still related. You're also identifying that the job market was suffering because you're losing a lot of the cheap contractors from Poland and Eastern Europe, and they were now actually moving back.
So I think a country like Poland, who's achieved through hard work an incredible boom, is basically now rich enough to need all of their people, right? And they go back, and I think that's one of the thinkings that our leaders had, was we need new, relatively cheap labor, and that's why we have had this.
So Germany suffered from Poland getting essentially stronger.
No, I wouldn't say suffer. Look, these are self-inflicted wounds in Germany, so I don't think you can blame it on anyone except the leadership there, right? So that's a fact. So I wouldn't blame all of this blame gaming.
Not like a negative thing, just like a fairness, right? So as you said, Poland needed people, therefore it was able to attract them back in their own country. Germany then suffered from, as you said,
many hits.
As
the
well
energy hit.
Yeah.
It has a demographic time bomb, like many of us in the West have. And the fact is that, there's other players around.
Yeah.
Other players can also create great things.
It's no longer this dominant industrial. So why was the inflection point this year then?
I think the inflection point was right after the war, and in big assets, in big capital investments, they take time.
Yeah.
But once they are cancelled, they're actually cancelled for a long time, right? And what you could see in Germany, and obviously from from being in the industry long enough, you know where to look. And you know where to look in terms of energy consumption, but you know also where to look in terms of planning. Like what other, factories are we going to create to continue to grow? And it just looked terrible. And for me,
then you start to see material job losses coming through.
And
you were making that point about like the job
and
market.
what jobs do you have?
What
is it productive jobs or is it paper shuffling jobs?
Well, that's what you said, that they're hiring bureaucrats like mad, right?
A lot of paper going around. Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, so Germany. And I think initially you think German power was the source of your main like bearish kind of
absolutely.
trade reflection, but you shifted that to carbon. Well, why is that?
Well, I would say because Europe basically and its leadership, I think, visibly have seen the writing on the wall. And look, the carbon market has been meddled with many times, right? We had this switch from all of a sudden from the hand-in period from April to September. In the past, you've had, without going into the countries themselves, you've had the place where countries had to bail out their industry many times because basically they didn't adhere and they didn't follow because again, and one, if it's interested in the carbon markets, there's plenty to read. But one of the things is that we had also this free allocation bit, which is like basically saying, okay, governments will give out parts of the carbon permits that you need to hand in to industry for free, which basically should give them enough time to convert into cleaner operations. And in a kind of vacuum world where we're not confronted by geopolitics, philosophically that will work, right? Because the incentive is to make it clean.
Yeah.
And then one of the main questions would be, is the last carbon, so to say, ton spewed due to dirty production the most expensive or the cheapest? I think the jury's still out on the open.
But just about the US then. So Biden's big green initiatives.
Yes.
Was that the crux of it? Giving a lot of rebates, basically not having to take the burden of this carbon price for a while whilst you sorted yourself out.
Yes, industry, please come to America.
Okay.
And this onshoring, it's happening in America for sure.
But what's the crux of the green initiatives that Trump wants to unravel?
Well, it depends on how you name what you're actually doing, right? I mean, so to say that he would unravel, I don't know in the sense that what is wanted is cheap and stable electricity prices, gas prices, oil prices, so that your industry can function orderly and develop, right? And now basically what we have is a great competition for heavy industry. And Europe really is...
But where was the money from these green initiatives and Biden going then?
That's a good question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
That's a good question because in one sense, it's basically saying to industry, okay, you will get massive tax rebates if you build out your factory here.
Is that essentially shielding you from the carbon price?
It should be.
Okay.
It should be, right? Because America is not instituting this burden on itself at the moment, right? I mean, this may change. And to be fair, you do have a few carbon markets in America. You have it but they're state-based, right?
Okay.
So you have one in California and et cetera, et cetera. But I think...
No, fair enough. It's a complicated question. But if we go back to the Europe situation then, again, you're saying... I think I remember you saying quite well, now the UK's got one carbon market as well. It's all getting very complicated. But at the end of the day, we've had enough intervention from governments from that. Well, they are saying there's been enough government intervention to support this market. It's been going for a long time now. There's a lot of money in this market.
Yes.
It's functioning.
Yes.
So now we're going to let the free markets do its job.
Yes. Somebody like Peter Liese, who was the main rapporteur for environment, basically said, guys, we gave you a clear pathway. We want to be zero by then. We want to have this level by 2030, by 2040. These are the guidelines. We're going to have the market stability reserve, which will basically help us adjust once we're getting cleaner to take out more of the permits, so that we don't come into a situation of oversupply. And I think between the lines, and you can see this from Commission President von der Leyen and stuff. Look, we have a functioning market, and don't expect us to continue to bail out.
Okay, but that was a key thing that was said this year or last year, or
So I think you have to read in what is said. I think Peter Liese said this in the past year when it comes to the intervention into the carbon market. And when it comes to this year, I think in the new agenda of the Commission, it's been pretty clear that we want to be competitive.
It's such a great example of how we're bringing in all the geopolitics, understanding of energy policy and the fundamentals together, which is saying, look, now was the time. Being short carbon was a tricky trade because all these things might be going on.
Very volatile.
But you've got government intervention, you've got a mandated, people trying to make things work, there's government rebates, all the rest of it. Now you take in the view, okay, but they actually are signaling to market, we've spent enough money on this now. This is now up to you, free market, to sort it out. What does that tell you? Well, if there is a bearish signal, German economy is weakening significantly. That's the main industrial hub of Europe, or at least was.
Yes.
So if that's now on this rapid decline and Europe in general is on this rapid decline, then the governments aren't going to support the carbon price, and the carbon price should be inversely correlated, to industrial decline.
Absolutely.
And so that's why you start to get very confident that actually people probably don't like being short carbon because of, okay, potential gas crises with geopolitics, which is obviously very well founded, but also because there's this natural inclination that, well, the government will come and sort it out. A bit like OPEC with oil. People don't like being short oil because they say, yeah, but OPEC will just come in and make a cut. But if you now have made the call that they're not there, guys, that is a very policy-driven bearish view, if you know what I mean.
Yes, but it's not even that so I think, to be fair to carbon, it went from being an award for good behavior to now, in essence, it's a punishment for all of Europe.
Yeah.
In my view, at this price. To be fair, prices can be very volatile.
But where would it be a happy balance? Because right now, as you said, it's like 60 euros.
I think look at the prices that you have around the world, and especially if you want to incentivize people to adhere to your prices and to adhere to actually carbon counting and having efficient markets, much lower, I would say.
30?
We used to be lower. I think at some point what the Europeans will realize, if there's too much volatility in the carbon price, they will actually either come with a price floor under which they wouldn't sell permits anymore, right? Because the supply that we have in our markets is from auctions, which come from governments, and that they will say, okay, guys, if the prices drop dramatically, auction will not clear, right?
Explain an auction quickly, just in simple terms.
Yeah, but well, basically it's saying that participants in the auctions are actually those that have a physical need to hand in carbon permits, right? So it's big industrial steel mills, cement producer.
Could BMW be one of them?
Yes, absolutely.
So BMW says,
we need to hedge our look. I don't know their exact profile,
we're going to
but
be using fossil fuels to run our manufacturing plants and all that kind of stuff. We then need to go and buy the permits to do so.
So I think maybe a perfect example apart from BMW would be somebody really who uses lots of baseload, which would be BASF, right? So what they're saying is, okay, we have a good view on our needs, and because they have their own power production, okay, this coming month we will not need to run so fast, so hard our plants. So basically we will be buying less, right? We can sell our surpluses.
Issue is of the permits of the government.
Yes, the issue, but I'm saying once you have them, because you also get free allocations, is in the market you behave in that way. But then in the auction process, you also have financial players in there, right?
But you're now saying, so the government's saying, look, we're actually saying, look, you can produce carbon, like here's the permit to do so. We're saying, you know, we don't even need it because we're not able to produce carbon.
Well, the goal is to get to much less consumption of carbon. Right. So
but
again,
the way you would want that to happen is
in a good way.
In a good way,
yes,
which is a lot of energy demand being solved and not
yes.
needing energy permits carbon permits.
And
right
not
now.
because factories leaving.
Yeah. So we're not buying the carbon. Europe's not buying the carbon permits in the auctions because they're not able to produce the fossil fuels because there's not the economic demand and the industrial demand, and that's quite a big difference.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, okay, that's pretty.
And I would say again, and I think markets will eventually function efficiently in that way. And that's not to say that, you could have a bulge in of financial players saying, great, this market is fantastic, it's liquid, we're very bullish on it because ABC will buy it and then we'll stockpile it and that's it. But there comes the financial incentives. Who will you sell that to? Because there's no good Samaritans in like the financial world, in the sense that they will say, okay, we're going to buy all these carbon permits because we want Europe to be clean, and we will actually let them default in a sense and not bring them back to the market. Yeah, okay, if we have a lot of those, then prices will shoot up, right? But me don't think so, right? And having said that, I think the financial markets are smart in the sense that they will be able to say, okay, can this region of the world actually afford this or not? And I think there's plenty of signs out there.
That's part of the price discovery process, right?
Yes,
and
for
again,
sure.
as long as governments stop intervening and let the market do its thing, which is probably getting to that point.
I think, and what many people didn't realize, that in this Green Deal, that the carbon price is actually the first federal income of the European Union, right? It's so these the sales from the auctions are basically going into the European coffers and then being redistributed, right? And this is a very big deal, right? Because and I'm very much in favor of European integration, and we should probably at the end have a federal Europe if we want to have a chance of creating a good life for future generations here, because the world is in competition mode right now. Everybody wants to develop, and with the onset of AI and robotization and what that will have on everyday lives, and will people have enough jobs? Will we have to go to a basic income level? I think we have a lot of these themes crashing upon us. And in a thematic way, when you're thinking about your positions and what are the themes, many things need to come inside, and it's never in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? And it was great being bullish carbon because it was such a simple trade.
Yeah. Pierre Anderon was talking it up.
Say what?
Pierre Anderon was talking it up. Everyone was talking it up. A lot of speculators, retail, doing quite well. I think to be less gloomy about it, at least from my perspective, is, again, you said financial markets being smart. This is the bit I'm passionate about, is that once we figure out all these things, the great thing about electricity markets, let's call them, like power, but electricity, is that because they're so efficient, and if we can solve things like battery storage and have, as you said, a more consistent base load, there's so much development.
And controllable base load, I think, is what people really need to understand. It's you want controllable, clean base load electricity.
Yeah.
And somebody saying, just to get this point in, somebody saying your industry should adjust its production profile to renewables is a death sentence for industry in the country of the person who says that.
Okay. But I'm saying is in like there's still this huge disparity between what's actually going on in electricity markets versus what is hitting you as an end user consumer and your control over that. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to purchase forward physically delivered contracts for yourself to secure your energy at home, be it oil, be it electricity. So I think the future is definitely there. One thing I'm really interested in exploring with the team as we get this foundation sorted is, look, there are so many markets. Just in Europe, you're just sticking super vanilla, and you've already got, France, Germany,
the Nordics,
Italy,
all this kind of stuff.
But then you've got like Japan, which has got endless number of contracts. You've got a contract for every state in the US. There's like the power financial market has got this huge boom ahead of it, which is probably similar to what oil swaps has done in the last 12 years. Well, we're very keen to attack it and be interested, but it is a different game. We don't want to be naive about it and try and cookie cut.
Not at all.
But at the same time, the principles are still the same. A more efficient market of price discovery, more of an underlying kind of base load that's controllable on the physical, yes, but then also governments having more of an understanding of how to create orderly markets, and then utilities and what they're charging and duties and things like that. That all needs to become way more transparent. I mean, you talk about like the federal things, the federal prices or whatever, like there's a lot that can be done to standardize electricity markets around the world, which will create security and all the rest of it. So that's all ahead of us, which is the good stuff, right? It's the less gloomy stuff, and that's what we're here to be involved in, right?
I think it's, and the thing comes into, people get attacked for even wanting to say anything that's counter the narrative. And it's not about just being gloomy, but it's about having said, guys, these are the realities. It's not going to change just because.
Well, that's what I said. Trading's not for you if you want to push a political narrative.
No.
I even remember at Onyx we had someone who was saying, oh, you know, Boris Johnson champagne, all that kind of stuff. We're like, yeah, fine. But you know Russia are about to invade Ukraine. And if they do, you're going to see queues up and down the gasoline station, all that kind of stuff. Okay, we saw that for a bit. Maybe it wasn't as potentially bad as it could have been. But it was still pretty damn bad. And there was still the cost of living crisis. I was like, how does that now look about Boris Johnson's champagne? You know, what should really have been on the front pages? What should you really be concerned about?
And why was that on the front page?
Exactly. And what are the realities of the impact of these things, rather than saying, you know, these people are bad, these people are good. It's like, no, you need to understand how this affects our everyday life. And that democratization of not just being able to access these markets and secure yourself, actually knowing what the fuck's going on, right? There's a big journey there that I think the world's going to be on in the next 10 years. And we're going to be a big part of it. And I appreciate massively flying over from Zug to be here. And yeah, thanks in general. It's really enlightening. I love it. Just the beginning, right? Just the beginning of the big understanding at Onyx and what we're here to do. And yeah, hopefully a long relationship. And thanks everyone for listening. A slightly different take on what we usually do. Again, please check out more on all the rest of our channel and see you again soon.